Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight's going to be a little bit different because a prominent real estate broker in Mississauga, Akbar Zareh of Kingsway Real Estate Brokerage, has said, Brian, I want to interview you because I want to find out if you're the kind of person that has the policies and the background and the ability, the leadership skills to be the mayor of Mississauga. Akbar has been in the real estate business in Mississauga in the area for 30, 40 years. He's done private single-family homes. He's done multifamily homes. He's done commercial. He's done everything. And he's brought a lot of people into the real estate brokerage industry on a fairly regular basis. So he's a great mentor, a great leader, a great coach. He understands the real estate business extremely well. And he tells me that he actually interviewed the mayor of Toronto and got like 1 million views or something like that on some of the videos that he did. So he obviously does a reasonably good job of interviewing people. Akbar, welcome back to the show because I've had the privilege of chatting with you before.
Yes, been on your guest. Thank you again, and thank you for, I appreciate you accepting my invitation. And I think it's very important for the residents of Mississauga to make sure that whoever takes the office is the right person and doing the right thing for the residents, not just a certain group of people. And I think you are the front runner. You are the most respected person in the list of the candidate. And I thought maybe it would be a great this time around. I ask you a few questions.
Sounds great. Go ahead.
Why people should vote for you, and why, first of all, why do you want to take this job and this huge responsibility? Not that you are not capable of it. You are very well, know the city. You are the residents of Mississauga, and who better than you? So why do you want to be a mayor?
For a couple of reasons. Number one, I worry that Mississauga has lost its way. And I really think that I could improve things. Obviously with people like you and people on council and the civil service that I think are capable. But I do think that Mississauga needs some new leadership, and I think that business-oriented leadership that I could bring to the table, I think is what Mississauga needs today. I spent the last 40 years, like you, in private business. I worked for the Walt Disney Company in Los Angeles, California, doing master plan community development in Southern California and in Central Florida and in Paris, France for the Walt Disney Company. I did development and finance and other things for the Molson companies. And one of the most material things was I redeveloped a downtown railway station in downtown Montreal, Windsor Station, and got the zoning for and the financial for building the arena that was the Molson Center, now the Bell Center, and 5 towers around that is the new center of downtown Montreal. We developed 6 properties across Canada that are multifamily residential, that were old breweries that we converted into new developments. I've done a big development for Eugene Melnick and the Ottawa Senators in Ottawa, one that went ahead and one that didn't go ahead, regrettably, but negotiating with the National Capital Commission, the City of Ottawa, the Province of Ontario, and the federal government and some Indigenous groups to get the approval to build an arena and a whole bunch of hotels and retail and entertainment and condos and other residential and infrastructure improvements on Le Breton Flats in downtown Ottawa. So I've done this for private enterprise. I'm currently the chief operating officer for a real estate development company that is across Canada and in 3 states in the United States. But I've never done it for government. I've always done it for private enterprise, and I've always been involved in politics my whole life, but always from sort of the back seat and supporting other people. And I thought that now's the time that Mississauga needs a change. Frankly, I think Canada needs a change and a more of a business orientation. Too many career politicians that are running the show. I interviewed Bob McCowan, the sports columnist, podcaster, commentator, and he said, you know what, the Leafs are mediocre. They make it to the first round, but they never make it beyond the first round. What they need is new leadership. They need a heavyweight. They need someone that's going to come in and shake things up. Well, you know what? I think Mississauga might be the Leafs. The same thing. I don't think we make it into the big leagues. I think that we could and should, and we need new, brave, business-oriented, experienced leadership, not a career politician, not someone that's been on council. So that's number one, is I think I've got the experience, and the experience that is perfect for the time. Number two, I think that we've got some big problems that I'm not sure the people that have been on council in the past are the right people to plan them. Let me tell you what they are. Number one, I think we got to attack our budget. I think they're misrepresenting the tax increases. They called it a modest 2.3% tax increase. It was actually a 3 times larger 6.3% tax increase. They are doing the calculation wrong. They're representing it wrong. And I worry they don't actually understand it. And they're fooling themselves and trying to fool us that it was a modest tax increase when it was actually a 6.3% tax increase. And worse, the province, the region appeal, they say is a 4.5% tax increase. It was actually 8.4. It was almost as bad as the city of Toronto that got, the 10% tax increase that people went berserko over. And no one in Mississauga is going berserko over this because we're being misled as to what the tax increases are. And they're just using bad math. What they're doing is they're taking the Mississauga tax increase and they're dividing it by the Mississauga taxes and the Peel taxes and saying it was 2.3%. Then they take the Peel tax increase and divide it by the Mississauga taxes and the Peel taxes and saying it's 4.5%. And then adding the two together and saying it's 7.5% increase, which is crazy. It was actually 6.3 and 8.4 and averages down to the 7.3. So by saying it's 2.3, they're wrong. It's actually, so if you don't understand and can convey the problem, you're fooling yourself. I worked for a boss one point in time that said, Brian, if you can't understand something so well that you can explain it simply so that people understand, you don't understand it well enough. And they are misleading you. And I think because they're misleading you, they're not attacking the budget the way they need to. I think we got a housing affordability crisis. You're in real estate. You would probably know this better than anybody, but it takes, an average medium income of over $240,000 a year today to afford a house in Mississauga.
Right.
How many people have got a combined family income of $240,000? That put you in the top, percentage of incomers. We are becoming a city that only the rich can afford to move into. And that's, I don't think what Mississauga was a place where a middle income family could come buy a house with a backyard. And I think we've lost that. We've lost that. And I think it is unjust. We have an intergenerational inequity that is unjustified. It's almost immoral. We are giving our young people, think about it, we're giving them housing and affordability, the largest per capita debt that we've ever had that's, I think, unsustainable, climate change, wars in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. And then someone comes along and says, and AI is going to take all your jobs away. And for 4 years or 3 years, we told them they couldn't go to school. They had to stay at home and do all their schools on Zoom. Kids today are the most depressed they've ever been. And I think that's a real problem.
So let's just continue on based on what you just mentioned regarding the residents and their security and so on. The crime rate. I wanted to touch on the crime rate to make it a safer place. What are you going to do to make it Mississauga a safer place for residents to live in?
So I think it's a few things. Number one, and you're quite correct that crime is up, burglaries are up, carjacking, car theft, home invasions, and we're hearing about guns in Port Credit. Who ever heard about guns in Port Credit before? So I think it's a real problem. So number one, you got to take away the profit, and the profit right now is just too easy. And what I'm told is the biggest conduit for the profit to leave the country and for people to make it is that it's the Port of Montreal export in containers of used cars. And I think that's a big problem. And I think the way to solve that is that we got to go to the federal government, we got to go to Ottawa, and we got to demand that they immediately close down the Port of Montreal for the export in containers of used cars. Period, full stop. The United States has got these big scanners that scan each container. I'm told it takes way too long and these scanners cost way too much money. So just close it down. Why do you have to export cars from the Port of Montreal? Take away the profit, number one. Number two, you got to have a deterrent. People are getting out on bail that night or the next day. That's wrong. We've got to make sure that car theft is such that you don't end up getting out on bail. You got to spend some time in prison. And I think it is the problem with the criminal justice system, with the bail system, and with the lack of prison space. And so I think that's got to stop right away. I think the next thing is And, Patrick Brown, the mayor of Brampton, did a brilliant thing. He just sent out these pouches that people could put their fobs in, such that people outside couldn't steal your electronic signal to start the car. It may sound silly, but the simple fact of telling people to take their fobs upstairs or to put them in a pouch that you can't get the signal, because what's happening is people are coming into people's driveways, and you can just pick up the electronic signal from the fobs that people are leaving at the front doors and steal the car and away it goes.
Yeah.
I met with a guy this week that said his fancy, Lexus SUV was stolen twice in a month, and just by people stealing the fob. So that may sound like a silly solution, but sometimes easy, silly solutions actually work. We got to educate people. Don't leave the keys at the front door. Take them upstairs and put them in a pouch such that someone can't steal the signal. And then I think the last, and frankly, the most important thing, and it may sound a little bit idealistic, but it's the truth, is nosy neighbors are the best defense. Vigilant neighbors are the best defense. We have to have an attitude where we're one community and we're watching out for our neighbors. And I think we've lost that. And I think we've lost that.
That sense is gone. That culture is gone, diminished actually. So nobody cares anymore about their neighbor.
I think, I think part of it is COVID, where we were all, sent home and we became very isolated and we became less community oriented. I think that was number one. And I've got a whole thing I could talk about on that, which I think is a real shame. I think number two, we don't have that community spirit anymore. Fareed Zakari, who's a commentator on CNN, did a really good show 10 days ago where he talked about how social capital is diminishing dramatically. And we need to build social capital up again. And social capital is that, personal interaction, that personal trust, that social trust that exists within a community. And I think our polarization in politics, I think our lack of festivals, our lack of getting to know one another, our lack of going to other people's celebrations, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we're not as cohesive as a community anymore. Jane Jacobs, in 1960 something or other, wrote a book called The Life and Death of Great American Cities. And what she said, the most important thing is noses on the street. You got to have eyes on the street. You got to have noses on the street. You got to have vigilant neighbors. You got to have a society of a culture. One of my competitors in the race, a current city councilor, is recommending a $10,000 snitch line. That is the opposite of what you need. Yep. Then all of a sudden, people aren't going to give information in as to what's going on until and unless they get the $10,000 from the snitch line. And the best example I can give you is blood donor clinics. You know what happened when in the Southern United States, they started paying for blood? No one gave it for free.
That's right.
They waited until they got the money. As soon as you put in place a $10,000 snitch line, people aren't going to be the citizens that they.
That's right.
She's turning, watching out for your neighbors and having good community from a thing that you do because you're a good neighbor and you're part of a citizenry into a transaction where it can make money. It's the exact opposite thing that a leader should be recommending in today's society.
Interesting. What about housing? Right now, as you know, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've seen city here. When I looked out my office from city center, was all vacant lands and the high rises being built and what have you. But as far as what I wanted to touch on, granting permit and so on, right now it's taking so long. Why is that? And what are you going to do to make changes to speed up that process by, so we can solve this housing issue crisis that we are dealing across Canada, across Ontario, especially in the city of Mississauga, with a population of almost 1 million people. So what are your plan, your solution to this crisis?
I've got a lot of ideas on this. I've got a whole policy on it, but could we take a message break and come back in 1 minute and explain it all to you? We're going to be back in a minute or two. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Akbar Zareh. He is a owner, founder, head of Kingsway Real Estate, a major brokerage here in Mississauga. He's done an incredible job of hiring, training, recruiting real estate agents over the years. He knows more about real estate than anyone I've ever met. And he decided that he wanted to turn the tables on me and interview me today to see whether I had what it took for him to vote for me for mayor. And you were just asking me about housing and what my solutions for housing would be, right?
Right.
So let me answer you. So I do think that our housing affordability crisis is the #1 issue in Mississauga today, other than taxes and other than crime. But it's right there, because I think that our council has created a planning and approval process that is one of the worst and slowest planning and approval processes in Canada. The OECD did an analysis of countries that were part of the OECD and said Canada had the worst process. And then CMHC and Stats Canada did a survey and found out that Toronto, Mississauga, Vancouver, and Victoria were the slowest in Canada. We are meeting like something where between 15 and 20% of our targeted housing starts based on what the provincial government has said. We missed out on getting a huge amount of money from the provincial government because we didn't have enough housing. And I think it is primarily because our planning and approval process takes too long. And it takes too long because of red tape and regulation and political interference. And we need to change all that. And so the ways that I would change it is, #1, I would reduce the review time period by 50%. And I don't think that's hiring a whole bunch more people. What it is ensuring that they do it far more efficiently, more effectively. Don't go through the process over and over and over and over again. It doesn't have to be 11 different committees that have to get involved. We need to simplify the process. I think we need to change our zoning such that it is more straightforward and simpler. I heard this story that one street all wanted decks, or a whole bunch of people wanted decks. Every single person had to go to the Committee of Adjustment to get approval to build a deck. Well, if you're going to approve decks for every house, change the zoning so everyone can build a deck. Like, why do you have to ban decks and then have every single one come for approval of the decks? Just change the zoning, right? And that's part of this attitude that the federal government's imposed about the fourplexes and as of right. If things are going to happen anyway, whether it's because the Committee of Adjustment's going to approve it, or the OLT is going to approve it, or City Council going to approve it, let's just put it into the zoning so people can do it anyway as of right. And so I think that #1 is shorten the approval time period. #2 is simplify the zoning process. #3 is, I think the only way out of this is to increase density around transit nodes. We're almost out of space. We're out of space for single family homes. I think there's 2, maybe 3 infill places that you can put more single family homes in Mississauga. So if we're going to grow, the only place we're going to grow is up. We know that. And the only place you're going to grow up without destroying our neighborhoods is around major transit stations, GO train stations, and potentially LRT stations along here in Ontario. And I think that every architect that has told me is that above 6 stories, you don't notice height. So if it's 6 or 8 or 10, you don't notice. If it's 30 or 40, you don't. If it's 50 or 80 or 60, you don't notice it. But what we do notice is the streetscape, the retail, the public realm, whether you've got a vibrant main street, we do notice. I think we focus too much on the height and not enough on the main street, on the streetscape. So what I would do is around major transit nodes, #1, assuming you're going to have an attractive streetscape that is alive, that's vibrant, it's got retail, it's got restaurants, it's got amenities, things like that. I would have a 20% across the board increase in your density. And half of that should be dedicated to affordable rents, not affordable social housing per se, but affordable rents, which are by CMHC guidelines 20% below the market rent, so slightly cheaper. And I think if you did that, we would go a long way, because if someone's got 20 stories approved and they can go to 24, and 2 of those floors are going to be affordable, or if someone's got 50 stories approved and they're going to go to 60 and 5 of them are going to be affordable, I think that would go a long way to increase the density. And then I think we need to look at those GO train stations and be realistic about what the appropriate density is. I know that one of the GO train stations has a density of maximum of 12 stories. In Vancouver, in a situation like that, the BC government said the minimum height is 12 stories. So in Mississauga, we saying the max you can go to is 12 stories. In Vancouver, in a similar situation, saying the minimum you can go to is 12 stories. We want higher. It's night and day, the attitude that we've got in Mississauga versus the attitude that more progressive, forward-thinking cities are thinking about. And that's why I think we need someone that's going to come into the city and going to take a fresh look. And I'll give you one last thing if I could.
Yep.
Carolyn Parrish. She's been on council for a long period of time. On Monday night, she said, you know what? The solution is to have all the qualified developers that I think are appropriate should come to meet with me in a summit once a month, and I'll get their things done. You know what? When a mayor has to get involved like that, you know what? You've got a bad system. And what you're going to do is you're going to replace and fix a bad system with favoritism and political judgment that may or may not be right, and a mayor that is sort of inserting themselves constantly into the system to override what people are doing. People have complained about Premier Ford with MZOs and changing things with the Greenbelt and other things. Well, do we want Carolyn Parrish to start doing the same thing? If you need a mayor to get involved once a month with her political friends, that's not the solution. The solution is fix the system so that the people that know best, the planners that we've, in our judgment, hired to run the system, make the decision more quickly and approve things more justifiably, equitably, and with an attitude toward knowing that we want development so that we actually meet these provincial targets rather than wanting to stop all development. I was told by a major guy at Altus who do most of the zoning work and appraisal work that too many of the civil servants and planning departments don't want any development. They're anti-development. They're there to stop development rather than the attitude that you should have, which is sort of what the economic development department has, is I want to attract development. I want good development. I want development that is going to be good for my city, but I want to attract development. I want development to take place. If people want to keep taxes down, one of the best ways to keep taxes down is grow the tax base, spread it out over more people or companies, which is even more important than that.
Right. So you have tremendous amount of time you have spent on developments and your background that you worked on for 40 years in that sector. I think you have a wealth of knowledge to be able to help the city with this when it comes to housing, affordability, zoning, and stuff that you can completely revolutionize this whole system that we have, old system rather, that we have sitting there, and the people that are sitting there and putting a stop, delaying, and so on. The more housing we have, the better, the more affordable I think it's going to be. And that's the problem right now. When I was selling pre-construction properties here, say 5 years ago, dollar per square feet, we were selling it for $350, $400 per square feet. Now triple, right by my office.
Over $1,000 a square foot.
$1,200 per square feet. My God, how can average Joe afford to buy a 600 square feet condo?
They can't, but let me ask you a question. What's pre-construction condo market like today? I heard that it's down like 71%.
71%, exactly.
And so how is a city going to get that going? And you know what? The solution that Steve Dasco and Deepika D'Amelio had at a debate I was at on Tuesday. You know what they said is, well, we'll take away the building permits for people that don't start them. But the threat of you taking away my building permit, that's not going to get me started. I need those sales before the bank's going to give me the money. So they're making the system worse. They're threatening people rather than making it better and helping people. You know what I would do? You know what I would do? I would take away development fees for any condo less than $500,000.
Right.
I would say, I'm gonna our development fees are what, over $100,000?
Development charge has gone up huge. I mean, like compared to 5 years ago, look at where it was and where it is.
And if condo sales are down 71%, those high development fees are never going to get triggered because no one's going to be buying or building. And so you can say they're high, and I'm going to charge money, but you're never going to get the money because they're not going to be sold. But if you took development fees for any condo less than $500,000 down to zero, developers would start building because people would start buying. And they wouldn't do everything under 500,000. They would do some under 500,000 and some over 500,000.
That's right.
Such that people could actually start buying again.
It would be incentive to the developer to get in the market and start building actually.
Yeah.
Right now it makes it very, very like the profit margin of any developer in Mississauga. I'm saying that strongly because I have the inside information. You're lucky if they make 10% profit.
Yeah. Well, the taxes are over 40% in total. Yep. We tax housing, new housing at outrageously high rates, higher than any
Yeah.
other sector of society. And
Mhm.
yet we then complain we don't have enough supply. Well, you know what? You tax it too high, you're not going to get the supply.
Right, right, right. Mhm.
Can I tell
Sure.
you one other thing that I think we need?
Please.
I think one other thing we need is vision. And I think we've lost vision and
That's
big
my last
ideas.
question to ask you. What's your vision for city of Mississauga? You read my mind. I have
Oh,
it right here, my screen right here. That what's Brian's vision for city of Mississauga and for my granddaughter and and the small kids that they're growing, what they going to challenge? What are the challenges? And what's your vision for
so
Mississauga?
I think Mississauga could and should be, the nicest city on the Great Lakes, right? We're a waterfront city. We've
Mhm.
got ravines that go through our city. It should be a spectacular city, and there's a couple of ways that we can do to make that better. So number one, we've got a couple of developments that are taking place on the waterfront,
Yes.
Brightwater and Lakeview.
Right.
One is going to be 15 to 20,000 people. The other one's going to be 25 to 50,000 people. There's
Right.
not one extra lane of roadway that goes
Mhm.
to those developments and no transit that goes to those developments. South Mississauga is going to be a congestion disaster. So what's the solution?
Right.
We need to have transit that goes there. And I've got solutions that can get transit to both of those developments. If you have transit that goes to either one of those developments, it would dramatically improve the access to those developments, other people's access to the lakefront and the waterfront in those developments. So that's number one, is dramatic increase in transit to those developments. Number two is all day two-way go on the Mississauga Milton line. When all the analyses were done on that by the Big Move and by the Neptus Foundation about a decade ago, they said that the Mississauga Milton line had an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. Some
Right.
transit has a 2-to-1. The Shepherd line and the Scarborough extension have a less than or 1 benefit to cost ratio. They actually cost more than the benefits come. This has an 8-to-1. It should be done. We've been talking about it for 50 years, and it's got to be done. And if you actually thought about building it and maybe 1 or 2 extra stops, it crosses Dundas at Cawthra. Why not put a stop at Cawthra? It crosses Mavis close to Dundas. Why not put a stop there? If you added 1 or 2 more stops and did it all day two-way every half an hour, 15-minute kind of service like you have in the Lakeshore line, it would be like we had a subway.
Yeah.
A subway above ground in Mississauga. You had a subway in Mississauga along Dundas, and if
Mhm.
you're Ontario LRT, then you've got a city that can move. Then what I think you got to do, so you got a city that can live with the kind of density and the development with the access to transit on the water and around major transit zones. You've got a city that can move with a surface subway that I've talked about. I think what you then need is a city where you can play. And the best 2 things that I can tell you, maybe 3, about where you can play the best, where you can live the best, is number one, One Port Street, which is down in Port Credit, is an 18-acre, 150,000 square foot warehouse building that if it was in Vancouver, the federal government, the local city would have turned it into Granville Island Market. If it was in downtown
Mhm.
Toronto, it would be the St. Lawrence Market. If it
Mhm.
was in New York, it would be South Street Seaport. You know what the current plan is for it? To do it into 10 condos. Why do we need another 10 condos on that site? It sticks into the water. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It should be turned into a retail entertainment complex that is the biggest, most wonderful attraction in
Love
all
it.
of Mississauga on the waterfront. There are 19 cities in North America today, 19 cities that are trying to develop retail entertainment on their waterfront, because that's what people want. They want to go to their water. They want to have something where they can enjoy their city. And I think that
Right.
we've got to do that. I'll give you 2 other examples. Riverdale Park, Arundel, and the Pinchin Farms, that's right
Mhm.
there at the Credit
Yep.
River at Burnhamthorpe, is 551 acres in total. It is a spectacular development, and it should be as important to Mississauga as Central Park is to Manhattan, as Stanley Park is to Vancouver. It's the 3rd largest urban park in all of North America, and we squandered an opportunity to make it the park that it could be. It should be as important to Mississauga is as Central Park is. And what do you need to do? You need to program it. You need to have the infrastructure in it. You need to have the events in it. You need to combine it. You need to manage it. You need to promote it. And you do all that, I think it's, it could be Mississauga
Beautiful
Central.
city. Yeah,
I'll give you
definitely.
one last one. There's a 120-acre farm, Britannia Farms on Huron, Ontario. It was gifted to the provincial government to use for educational purposes. And because it's supposed to be used for educational purposes, we haven't developed it. It's sitting there. If you go up the Etobicoke Creek to Bristol Road, you know what you get when you get to the Britannia Farms? And you're supposed to be educated by it? You get to a chain link fence with barbed wire on top. You can't get in there. It's been sitting fallow for the last decade plus.
Right.
It's got a sugar bush on it. It's got a working farm on it. It's got agricultural on it. 57% of the people in Mississauga have lived in Canada for less than 10 years. They don't know about the agricultural heritage of Mississauga. Why don't we have Black Creek Pioneer Village? Why don't we have Riverdale Zoo? Why don't we have something there that is spectacular? You know, I spent a couple of years in Blue Rose Village, and every weekend, you know what I do with my kids? We'd go to the small farm and the small zoo in Hyde Park, and go to Cabbagetown. You go to Riverdale Park. Why can't we have that right on here in Ontario, with access from an LRT on a 120-acre park that is owned by the people? And yet we've got barbed wire taking us away. So if you did transit to Lakeview, to Brightwater, a surface subway, all day two-way go, if you did a retail entertainment on One Port Street, a Central Park, 551 acres, that was spectacular, and something at Britannia Farms, and then maybe throw in a couple more great ideas, I think that would be the vision that would make Mississauga the city that it should be.
Definitely. I love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much sharing your visions, sharing your ideas. And it's always amazing. And it's a pleasure talking to you always and chatting with you on camera or off camera. So thank you, Brian.
I appreciate your time. And if you're at all interested in checking me out any further or helping me out, go to my website, if you could, briancrombie.ca.
Awesome.
Akbar Zareh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
We're going to take a break, and I'm going to come back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.